So that's pretty funny. I mean, because I'm talking about the Heart Sutra tonight. Like that. We planned it. It's actually quite appropriate because these chants in the Heart Sutra are the Heart Sutra is the most repeated set of verses in the Mahayana tradition, which pretty much accounts for the majority of Buddhist practitioners in the world right now. If you consider all the people in China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, and anyone in the West in Mahayana, on a daily basis, the Heart Sutra is the main chant. I'm sure sometimes it gets interrupted as well in all these places. But a chant, just because everyone's doing it, and it is considered a sort of concentrated, condensed form of the whole teaching. So it's like this sort of put it down, boil down the teachings, like one page. Now, originally when they were written, the Heart Sutra, it was the Heart Sutra of the Paramita Sutra. So the Prajna Paramita Sutra, all these written about, compiled, and they think first around, 400 years after the Buddha died, when the Mahayana started to become developed more strongly. And it had like 100,000 verses. So like a lot of pages was this sutra. And going over the teachings in so many ways. And then they made a version that was only 20,000 verses. And then they made another version that was like 10,000, 5,000, bargaining it down, getting it down until you can actually manage it. Because who's going to read those long ones? I guess some people. That's what monasteries are for. And then eventually you got down to this, but it didn't stop there. There's actually a version where it's one letter. The Heart Sutra is just one letter.
Which one?
They say A in translation. It's the letter A, or Aleph, or whatever the equivalent would be. It's the first letter of the alphabet. And that's it, and the legends around that is that like whoever uttered that letter, whenever that was heard, it just like broke through all of their, delusions so that they had immediate enlightenment. But I don't know how to pronounce the letter, so I can't help you. Now, what that means is that the Heart Sutra is a teaching. Okay, it's the presentation of the teachings, of the essential teachings. The teachings themselves are not holy. We don't revere them. They're not like a holy book. I don't know if anyone's ever gone to like a Sikh temple in Amritsar, the Golden Temple, and they have like this holy book, right? And the book is like holy. They put it to bed. They like put it literally to bed, and they fan it so it stay cool. It's like a person. They carry it around on like it's a special book. The sutra is not like that. The sutra is totally insubstantial. The sutra lives up to its name. It's about emptiness. The sutra is empty of holiness, right? But it's also empty of non-holiness. So you can't say it's holy, you can't say it's not holy. You can't say it's anything, actually. That's the essence of this teaching, is that you define it, it slips out. Like, what do you say about one letter? And even that letter probably will disappear. So the Heart Sutra is so ungraspable. And the reason it's ungraspable is because it's trying to reflect reality, which itself is ungraspable. The teaching is not just about trying to condense the versions of these 100,000, Buddhist teachings, or trying to give us a summary of all the teachings. You can do that. We can do that. We can go through this, and we will. I actually brought on another page here. I'll give it out to you. Just for comparative level, I brought 2 other translations of it. Now, the Heart Sutra has been translated. Everyone can take one. It has been translated into Hebrew. In fact, my old mentor, Yaakov Raz, led a group of students at Tel Aviv about 15 years ago, and they came up with a Hebrew translation of the Heart Sutra. I know he was handing it out, but I just didn't get a copy because I wouldn't know what to do with it. But now I do. I'll give it to you. So if you go online sometime and you write Heart Sutra translation Hebrew, you'll probably find a pretty good one, because they worked as a group for a year. It was a practice where they met weekly. And, it's not a simple thing to come up with a translation of something that is so, in a sense, hard to grasp, ungraspable. So, the reason I brought these different translations, in addition to the one we use, so we actually have 3, and in the koan course, we have a little booklet where there's actually another 3 translations, or there are another 3 versions. So, yeah, sure. There should be a lot around here. Is there another?
Yeah.
Where's the page? Yeah. So bring it on up. Has to keep moving. Keep it moving. So actually, there are many translations, and each tradition has its own translation. The reason I chose these is because they're modern. They're contemporary translations done by some well-known teachers. And the first one here, which is called The Insight That Brings Us to the Other Shore, you already know that by the title, Heart Sutra, and that's how Thich Nhat Hanh, who probably many of you have heard of, and Norman Fisher, who also was the abbot of the San Francisco Zen Center. And Norman Fisher is a poet, and Thich Nhat Hanh also is a poet. These are 2 poets from a Mahayana and Zen tradition. Okay, they're poets in English, although I think Thich Nhat Hanh also writes in Vietnamese. But Norman Fisher is a well-known published poet in America and a lifelong Zen leader. So they took the Heart Sutra and they translated it. And that's what they came up with, and I wanted to compare it. Why? To help us loosen a little bit our attachment to words. Bodhidharma, the founder of Zen, was clear in his first teaching of saying the truth is transmitted directly, not through scriptures and not through words. So why am I even bothering with these versions and translations? Why do we even chant it? Because we don't start with transmission. We start with the words, and it leads to transmission. And when you get transmission, meaning when you get some insight, the words drop away. But it's really hard from our upbringing and from the way our minds work to skip the stage of language. So we use language as a tool, and when it does its job, we let go of the language. But not before that, right? Not before that. So we have to respect, the way our minds work, and they work through language. But the reason I brought different translations is to say, well, you know what? Don't get attached to the language. You see that it's open and it's subject to interpretation. It really is. We've been chanting one version, which is a very traditional version, I have to say. It's a traditional version, and it's done in a whole school, especially in North America, of Zen. But it's limited, as all translations are. So I want us to get a sense of the language a bit and how it can open up. And I'm sorry it's not in your own language, but I hope that you can get a sense that the different translations offer a certain openness. Okay. Now, just before we actually read it, I want to emphasize the fact that the reason I'm focusing on the Heart Sutra, not just because it's really, really central. It's like the central text of Mahayana tradition. Okay, it's really the central text. If you have to go over one text, but it does within it refer to all the main teachings that the Buddha gave. So if we are able to, get a certain appreciation, it does, pretty much go over every stage and every teaching of how the Buddha saw the human life and what we're doing here. So that's why the Heart Sutra is called the Heart Sutra. It really is like straight to the heart of the teachings. And the other thing I really want to emphasize is one of the main teachings in Mahayana is of the Bodhisattva ideal. The Bodhisattva ideal, Bodhi is enlightened and Sattva is being. So the ideal in Mahayana is that your enlightenment is for the sake of all other beings, that you will not be free of suffering until everyone's free of suffering. We're united in this effort. And you will commit to keep on working to relieve the suffering of all sentient beings. That is the Bodhisattva ideal. So that even if you're given a ticket to get out, to escape, you would, refuse that ticket. You say, my work has not been done yet. So that's the ideal we want to try to live up to. And this is why the Heart Sutra is opened with the Bodhisattva of compassion. Bodhisattva of compassion is Avalokiteshvara. Avalokiteshvara, in Sanskrit, or Kanzeon in Japanese, and Kuan Yin in Chinese, they are all the same figure in the Mahayana, which is a feminine figure of compassion, the Buddha of compassion, that is depicted as having 1,000 eyes, 1,000 arms, to see all suffering and to reach out and try to attend to it, to help it out. Now that is the figure that is giving this wisdom here. So the heart of the teachings comes from that being. Right? And that's really important as a whole background, because when we start talking about emptiness and everything, we start to think this is so abstract. No, it's not at all. We're delving into this. This teaching is being given because it's being given from a place of compassion to end all suffering. Right? And this is the method to achieve that. So we have to understand that's the sort of ground of this whole thing is, male beings be free of suffering, and Avalokiteshvara is giving us this teaching. And that's why it says in all these three, Avalokiteshvara, Bodhisattva, Avalokiteshvara, who helps all to awaken. I'm not going to go over each verse here, but I just want us to compare a couple of them. Okay? I want us to look at the first verse. Now, I did kind of write it up here so that the first verse is, where it says number 1. Okay. Avalokiteshvara, while practicing deeply with the insight that brings us to the other shore, in other words, the Heart Sutra, suddenly discovered that all of the 5 skandhas are equally empty, and with this realization, he overcame all ill being. Okay, and I think at the other one it says, Avalokiteshvara, who helps all to awaken, moves in the deep course of realizing wisdom beyond wisdom. So here we see the Heart Sutra, instead of being the insight that brings us to the other shore, is wisdom beyond wisdom. Okay, and here it's just the Prajnaparamita Heart Sutra. Wisdom beyond wisdom, the insight that brings us to the other shore. Okay, moves in the deep course of realizing wisdom beyond wisdom, sees that all the 5 streams of body, heart, and mind are without boundary, and frees all from anguish. Okay, so that's pretty interesting. We already get a sense of these people are understanding it and translating it in very different ways. Very different ways. Here we have more traditional, okay, that suddenly discovered that all the 5 skandhas are equally empty. The 5 skandhas, the Buddha taught, this is already like the first teaching of the Buddha, where he taught that the way we consider a human self, what we consider a person, is a collection of 5 conditions that are changing. Those conditions are form or body, and sensation or feelings, and then perception, and then discrimination or will, like and dislike, and finally a sense of overall consciousness that there is an agent or a person with this, and that these are all going together and contingent on each other and always changing according to these changing conditions, meaning if they're always in flux. In the last skandha, or skandhas are called aggregates or heaps that come together. So a skandha is like a heap of a sense of self, a heap of selfhood that comes together. And those are always changing and moving and interdependent. So since they're interdependent, you change one of them and then you change the other ones. You change the form and then you change the sensations. And you change the sensations, and then what you perceive is different. What you perceive is different, then your likes and dislikes change. You know? Like your likes and dislikes, it gets warm in the room, it gets cold in the room, you like it, you don't like it, and then your overall consciousness is like, you know, I'm feeling good and I'm satisfied with my life, or, you know, why me, right? Like it just, these are 5 are working together so fast and instantaneously that you don't notice that there's a process happening. But when the Buddha slows things down and he kind of deconstructs this process a little bit, he sees that there's no solid selfhood there. And that's where it says here, or all the 5 skandhas are equally empty. Empty of what? Empty of solid, unchanging, permanent, inherent substance or selfhood. Okay? What we think is me is simply a collection of these changing conditions called the skandhas. And that's right in the beginning of this. So Avalokiteshvara, one of the important things, so on this teaching of the Heart Sutra, is really important as a meditation instruction. The Heart Sutra is not knowledge to grasp and own, but it's actually instructions on how to practice. Right here, what's important in the translations here, where it says in the first one, Avalokiteshvara, while practicing deeply with the insight. And the other one says, moves in the deep course of realizing wisdom. The second one is kind of almost too poetic for me. But what can you do? Now, our traditional one says just doing deep prajnaparamita. He was doing it, he was practicing with it, he moves deeply with it. Basically, understanding the nature of reality is not an intellectual realization. He was doing prajnaparamita. He was practicing it. He was moving deeply in this insight. Okay? This is something that then we have to accept as, if we want to really understand nature of reality, it's not through intellectual learning. It's through real existential insight. Moves deeply. You know, it was like, it moved in me. I saw the movement. I saw the change in these conditions, and I saw it in myself. Right? I saw how the skandhas, these, aggregates, were arising and dissipating constantly. Right? That's the movement here. It's the change of self as I observe it. It's actually not so complex. When you sit and you observe body and mind, moment by moment, what you're doing is you're realizing that the 5 skandhas are inherently empty of solid selfhood. Right? And that shifts and loosens our attachment that we have to who we think we are. So as he said here, the emptiness here, he said, are equally empty. Here it was, are without boundary. Boundlessness. They're not like, where one begins and the other one ends. I'm not sure. My state of mind, who I think I am, is dependent on a lot of conditions outside of what I define as me. So where does the I start and end? That's where they're boundless. Emptiness doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means the borders that I've drawn are illusory, are not definite, and ultimately real. Right? But they're just conventional boundaries. They're not ultimate ones. So that's why it says here it's a boundless or empty. So I want to read a couple more with you, if we may. Let's see where it goes. I want to get to, let's just see what happens. Listen to Sariputra. Sariputra is a disciple of the Buddha who is considered like his smartest student. Like he was a really good student. He was like he was the smart one. Okay, he was considered the Bodhisattva of wisdom. And Avalokiteshvara is the Bodhisattva of compassion. So you have compassion teaching wisdom, right? Which is the way it should go. Okay, that in itself is very instructive. That if you have wisdom without compassion, what's the point? What's it for? But if you have compassion without wisdom, then you'll get upset very easily. So you need the balance, all right? You need that balance. And that's why these two figures are kind of given, anthropomorphized in this. But they're just qualities of the mind that we need to hold together. Okay? So, listen, Shariputra. Body itself is emptiness, and emptiness itself is this body. Okay? Now, he says form. He says body because he's talking about the 5 skandhas. We just talked about the 5 skandhas. And here, though, the more traditional way is by saying form is boundlessness, boundlessness is form. Okay. Yeah, sees that all 5 streams of body, heart, and mind are without boundary, frees all from anguish. O Shariputra, form is not separate from boundlessness, boundlessness is not separate from form. And in our version here, form is not other than emptiness, emptiness no other form. Form is exactly emptiness, emptiness is exactly form, form and emptiness. Body and emptiness. Okay, this body is, I'm looking at the Thich Nhat Hanh one, at number 2. The body is not other than emptiness, and emptiness not other than body. The same is true of feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. Again, all he's doing here is going over the 5 skandhas. Once again, what we just went over. We had them called the 5 skandhas, and now he's explicitly reinforcing the fact that all of these 5 skandhas are empty or boundless. And really important here, and this is probably the most common mistake in understanding Mahayana emptiness. Emptiness does not mean non-existence. Emptiness means non-separation. Right? Emptiness means interdependence. Emptiness means that everything is related to everything else. So that you don't have these individual atoms just existing separate in the universe. But what looks separate is actually interacting intimately and totally dependent on everything else. That's the boundlessness here. It doesn't mean non-existent. It just means interrelated, interdependent. Thich Nhat Hanh calls it interbeing. So it's actually a much more helpful way of understanding it, and this is at the heart of compassion. The heart of compassion is to acknowledge that interrelatedness among all beings, so that if there is suffering, it's going to come back to me. And if I help, then I can also, help whatever is out there, because it's related. And it doesn't matter how small or how big. Sometimes we think, this is not really going to help. What's the big deal? It's not really going to help. Oh, really? This network of interrelatedness, how well do we know it? You know, how sure are we that the help or harm is not going to extend far? So the teaching here of emptiness is saying that everything matters. Everything matters because it's all interrelated. Right? That's the essence of form or body being empty. Because we have to remember that emptiness is also embodied, as it says here. The body is not other than emptiness, and emptiness is not other than this body. That's real important. Emptiness is not other than this body. Emptiness is not other than the body. Same is true as feelings, and so forth. Okay. Now, I am going to skip all the way to the last verse, because you guys can take this page home with you, and you can look at it at your leisure. But I want to look at the last verse, and I want to look at it first in our own our booklet here. Where it says, therefore no.
What page?
On page 5. Okay. Before we have therefore no, you see where we are? We have Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. Now we have this Heart Sutra, and it's all translated. And then they don't translate one line. Like, why is that? I mean, did you skip it? Did you miss it? Why did you do that? Why do you translate Heart Sutra, but you don't translate Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi? Prajnaparamita, and therefore attain Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. Like, what is the point? Why did you go all the way almost? Okay. Well, that's kind of interesting, because the explanation I got from the center I was at was that you can't translate enlightenment. Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi is ultimate and complete enlightenment. And even to say enlightenment is to miss the point, because we immediately start to project all of our ideas of what enlightenment is. So we're going to leave that line untranslated. That's what they said. We're just going to leave that one out, because, best left alone. And yet, here we have, at the bottom of this page, 8, where it says, at bottom of 8, all Buddhas in the past, present, and future, by practicing the insight that brings us to the other shore, are all capable of attaining authentic and perfect enlightenment. So they translated it. And over here they say, manifest, unsurpassable, and thorough awakening. All right, so we know it's something grand, big, and huge. And in a sense, to say enlightenment or awakening is to embrace a word that is itself needing translation. What is enlightenment? What is awakening? So basically, it's spacious and big enough, and groundless and vast, that even the translation doesn't really help us. It really doesn't. But the rest of this verse here, where it says, therefore no. Prajnaparamita is the great mantra, the vivid mantra, the best mantra, the unsurpassable mantra. It completely clears all pain. This is the truth, not a lie. So set forth the Prajnaparamita mantra, set forth this mantra and say, Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasangate, Bodhi, Swaha. More untranslated stuff. But a while ago, one of the reasons I even thought to talk about the Heart Sutra was because someone said to me after one of our evenings, he said, the Heart Sutra, it's so like, like this is true and it's not a lie. I go, why would you say, that's not very spiritual of you. I mean, it just seems odd to say that in this greatest verse, all these verses that are condensing the whole teachings. If it's the ultimate truth, you need to tell me it's not a lie? What? Why is that? Well, that does also trigger reactions that are true. You know, we have a lot of resistance. We have a lot of resistance to having some of our ideas challenged. And the strongest challenge is to the idea of the very sense of self. You know, your very sense of self, which is so ingrained, and we have a lot of attachment and aversion to this self. There are things that you love and things that you hate about you. But the love and the hate are both coming from a strong investment in who you are. The Heart Sutra knows what it's up against, right? The writers of this and the Buddha, who taught the original teachings of this, knew how deeply seated and attached we are to who we think we are, and who we think others are, and what we think the world is like. And sometimes we have to be told, you know, this is true. This is no joke. It's not a lie. No one's lying to you, okay? Because it's, you know, when we first read this, we're reading it from our ordinary mind. Our mind, which is very, you know, I don't get it, I don't want to get it. Right? But if you sit with it as a type of koan, we're studying koans. The Heart Sutra is a form of a koan, which is a very condensed teaching that you're not going to get. You're simply not going to get it. But one day it may get you. Interestingly, in the other translations, they erase that completely. And that's why I wouldn't use them. Because what does the one say here? This one says, therefore, Shariputra, it should be known, I'm in 9 at the top of this page, 9 of the Thich Nhat Hanh version. There's the last verse, right? It should be known that the insight that brings us to the other shore is the great mantra, the most illuminated mantra, the highest mantra, a mantra beyond compare, the true wisdom that has the power to put an end to all kinds of suffering. Therefore, let us proclaim a mantra to praise the insight that brings us to the other shore. What? What are we missing here? Oh yeah, it clears all pain. This is the truth, not a lie. Why'd you take that out? And then we have in the version by Kazuaki Tanahashi and Joan Halifax, who are co-abbats of the New Mexico Santa Fe Zen Center, which has been running for a long time. Here it says, know that realizing wisdom beyond wisdom is no other than this wondrous mantra. I'm at 9. Luminous, unequal, and supreme. It relieves all suffering. It is genuine and not illusory. So set forth this mantra, realizing wisdom beyond wisdom, set forth this mantra and say, at least they kind of went to it and they said, it's genuine. It's not illusory. This is a genuine thing. And after reading these alternative ones, I come back to the more traditional one. And I say, you know what? Don't beat around the bush. This is true, not a lie. You know? I appreciate that directness. You don't need to soften it for me. Sometimes I need to be slapped in the face. I need some cold water poured on me to wake up because I'm walking around like a sleepwalker. You know, I'm just like living this dream. And I need a little bit, sometimes, the Zen stick to help me wake up. And the Heart Sutra can be that stick in your, you know, in your thought, that you don't know what to do with it. It's uncomfortable, but necessary. Like an alarm clock in the morning. Yeah? The gentle music will just keep you in bed. Sometimes you need a bell to get up. And that's where I think this Heart Sutra can be for us. So, heed the bell.